Hello, this is Wmpyr. Back again here to talk to you guys about some things that I think is kind of relevant, okay, to help you in your martial arts and self-defense journey, okay. So today's combatives. So I'm talking about military-based programs. This is normally designed for soldiers, but it's taught to civilians for the purpose of self-defense. And the idea here is that if it works for soldiers, if it works in war, then for sure it's going to work in a self-defense environment. The basic idea is shoot for overkill, right? So that's why it is something that's very extreme. And if you're using something that's extreme, then you're going to overshoot, and therefore you should be okay in a self-defense environment. I think that is the idea there, right? So I have heard a lot, fairly frequent. Okay, a lot is that sounds like all the time, but I have heard several times. All right, several times that these combatives instructors, modern day self-defense combatives instructors, say that what they teach is MMA for the street. Okay, now when they say MMA, mixed martial arts, they're specifically referring to the sport, the combat sport of MMA, which is cage fighting. The biggest company is UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championships, so it is a sport. That's what they're referring to. So what they're saying there is that we do a street version of MMA. Now, let's think about that for a moment, okay? It's like, really? That's what you guys do? That's what you teach for self-defense to, soldiers, and you also teach to civilians, right, to protect themselves. You're teaching MMA based. So it's basically MMA, but there's some changes made for the street, for self-defense, but it's basically MMA, right? The core, the nucleus is going to be MMA. That's what they're saying. Okay. So then, now, why would they say that? Now, it could be because it really is. The nucleus, the core of what they do really is MMA based. Why would you base it off of MMA? Well, it's the argument that MMA fighters would have against, other styles. And they say, well, what we do is full contact. Yes, we have rules. Yes, we have referees, all that, but we're still doing full contact. What you guys are doing is not full contact. And definitely not at our level of full contact, because when you're talking about competition, it's going to be very, very competitive, right? It's not just training with the same people over and over in your dojo, or people that are going to respect your rank, or friends that you're training with. No, this is a competition, so it's much, 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 much tougher. And if you're talking about, depending on, is it local, regional? I mean, you could get bigger and bigger. Is it state? Is it national, nationwide tournament? Or is it worldwide tournament? All those things make that competition. Basically, the pyramid becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And then, are you in the top 10? So that kind of thing. The competition's super fierce. Anyway, their argument is, well, we do full contact. What those guys do isn't. So our stuff, even though we have rules, even though it's a sport, it's more realistic and it's going to work much better on the street. That's their argument, right? So then someone that says, right, our combatives program is MMA designed for self-defense. It's MMA designed for the street. So the core is MMA. Then they're saying we can do full contact. That's what they're saying, right? So then I can understand that, all right? I can appreciate that. Now, The other reason why people may say that is because MMA has become super popular in recent times. Ever since the first UFC in the 90s is exploded onto the scene, and it's changed the martial arts world. I remember the magazines I used to read, Black Belt Magazine, Inside Kung Fu Magazine, and a whole bunch of other martial arts magazines. At first, they had different styles, and they would showcase like Aikido, Praying Mantis, different martial arts styles, various. But then after the UFC, it started to become more and more MMA dominant. So then we had UFC fighters on the cover of these magazines, and it became very, very frequent, to the point where I think one time, just looking at the magazines, they were all like MMA, BJJ related stuff, and yeah, it completely dominated because it was that popular. And today I'd say it's become even more popular. So to say, we are MMA, but for self-defense, for the street, that they're going with the popular bandwagon, and people go, oh, I get that. Okay. So marketing wise, I guess it's smart. Okay. But if you don't really mean it, you shouldn't say it. Right. So if it's just for marketing and they're saying that just because MMA is what's cool, it's what's in right now, it's what all the young people that they do that, and they've accepted it as it's a tough style or perhaps the toughest, and you're just going with that, then shame on you. But if you really mean it, and your combative style that you're learning for self-defense, or you're the teacher, what you're teaching really is MMA based. Okay. When we look at the old combatives, I'm talking about Captain Fairbairn. I have a ton of respect for Captain Fairbairn and his material. When I look at that, it's different. Combatives has changed. So modern day combatives, a lot of times now they're saying it's MMA for the street. It's MMA for self-defense. Old time combatives like Captain Fairbairn's, while he respects boxing and wrestling and judo, and there's a video where he says that, you can see he respects the boxer, he respects the wrestler, he respects the judo guy. And how do I know that? Well, he says, don't box with a boxer, don't wrestle with a wrestler, and don't play with the judo guy, because they will destroy you. He's saying that they're tough and they're awesome at what they do. So to me, that's giving respect. But that's also saying what he does, gutter fighting, is different. So to me, the old school combatives was not MMA for the street, MMA for self-defense. It wasn't. It's different from MMA. So that's something very, very interesting to think about. Okay, who's right, who's wrong? I believe there's many ways to climb the mountain. Okay, I personally am partial to Captain Fairbairn's idea and methodology, but let me tell you guys this. Okay, Captain Fairbairn says what he does is different from that, but I believe, I don't have proof of this, but I'm pretty sure that he trained in boxing, wrestling, and judo. And there are people that they could research the history and they'll say, yes, he did. Okay. I haven't done that research, and I don't plan to do that research, but, there are people that have, and they could tell you. That's just my guess, okay, and from what that I've studied about him personally. My understanding is, yes, he has studied boxing, wrestling, and judo. Okay. So this is what I say to you guys. Okay. To me, there's a difference between self-defense and sport. Okay. Now, I'm not the first to say that. Obviously, there's lots of instructors that say that. Now, this is where I want you to separate what I'm saying from what everybody else is saying, because everybody says that, and I'm tired of hearing that, honestly. So this is the difference. I'm saying, yes, it's different, but there's also similarities. There's a crossover, okay? And 90% or 100% of the other instructors that say it's different, they ignore that. They ignore the similarities. So I want to make sure black and white telling you guys there are crossovers, there are similarities. Okay, so there are differences, but there's also similarities, and you cannot ignore that. You can't just go with, oh, let's look at how different it is because it makes you look better or it suits your concepts, your ideas. You can't do it because then you're play with the words and make it sound like what you're saying is fact, and you cannot manipulate that. So I'm saying that there are differences, but there's also similarities, and you cannot ignore that. And the best way is to train in both. So I say train in both. Captain Fairbairn trained in both. He trained in self-defense styles, traditional styles. He also trained in sports styles. So I'm saying the exact same thing as what Captain Fairbairn said and did. Train in both. Okay. Train in both. But when you do that, the problem is it becomes very, very easy to mix them up. So in a self-defense situation, if you're thinking like a sport fighter and you start fighting, that could get you in trouble. Okay. Now I did say there's overlap, so there's a time and place. So maybe in a self-defense situation, there might be a time where you need the sport techniques. I'll be the first to admit that. But you have to know when that is and when not to. When to use it, when not to do it. How can you figure this out? Well, by first you need to study both. Okay, if you only study one, and this has happened to me, I could tell with my own students. I have students that come in and they're interested in learning self-defense, right? And they tell me, I'm interested in self-defense, not in the sport. Okay, that's fine. And they never done sport. They get it mixed up. They think they need to fight. And what they're trying to do is sport. They don't know the difference. So in order to know the difference, you have to study both. And yes, there is a risk that you're going to get them confused. In fact, I would say you will get them confused at first. It's okay. That's a natural process. Once you do both and they get jumbled up in your head and you can't really tell what, and so you're walking around in the street and someone messes with you and you think you're going to fight like a TIE fighter, or you're going to use wrestling moves or whatever, that's perfectly natural. That I was the same way. But then you start to understand the difference. Okay, it takes time, but something has to click, and depends on the person how long it takes to click, but there is a difference, and in order for that to happen, for it to click, you have to study both. So that is what I'm saying. Okay. This is a very interesting subject, and I think this is why, because there's overlap. Because if you study both, you're going to get it confused at first. You won't know when to use when. You won't know the difference. All that kind of stuff is what makes it so confusing. But for me, this has been the way, my path. There might be other paths, but this has been my path. Is I cross-trained, I studied both, and of course I got them mixed up too in the beginning, and then as I kept going, it started to become more and more clear. So the techniques that I would use for sports, the techniques I would use for street, very different. Even back then it was different. Now I would say it's even more different. I've evolved to where it's become even more different. But I also take advantage of the crossover, so that I don't waste my time training in two totally different systems. I don't want to do that, So for those of you that are training in a self-defense system, let's say some kind of traditional martial art, and it's not sport, keep it going, but then cross train in sport, okay, and see the value in sport, okay. It's very, very important. And those of you that are doing sport, cross-train in self-defense systems and try to learn how to see the value in that, okay. Now in the combatives, what I recommend for modern day combatives, people that are training in that, what you don't want, in my opinion, so you're training modern day combatives, and yes, it is the self-defense version of MMA, it is the street version of MMA, okay, that's great. What you don't want is that, because I see this often, and I'm not going to name, who or what, because I see it all across the board. There's always, it's where I see it. It could be Krav, it could be any style, combatives, military style, taught for self-defense, and to me, it just looks like crappy MMA. So I'm not saying that all Krav people are like that, or all, modern Army combatives program people are that way, or no. What I'm saying is you don't want what you're learning, which is combatives for self-defense. You don't want that to end up looking like it's just crappy MMA, because if that is the case, it's just better that you go to an MMA gym and just learn quality MMA, a higher quality actual combat sports. Just learn. Yeah, just go to a MMA gym and do that. That would be way better than pretending, and say, okay, our core is MMA, and you're not really good at it. And then if someone says your MMA doesn't look that good, and then you go, well, that's because we do self-defense. We're not really sport. You guys are doing sport. We don't do that. So, and then that becomes like your escape, your excuse, and then those people, the same people that say that, I see their knife stuff, or I see their, non-sports stuff, and it looks just as bad as their sports stuff, or if not worse. I see them doing knife work where in training they're both getting killed. So you're going to use techniques that's getting you killed in the gym, and you're going to try to use that outside the gym. It doesn't make any sense. So, but the idea is they're going, well, at least we do knife training. And it's like, that's not good knife training. And then if you confront them and go, well, we do better knife training, then they go, well, we do MMA training. So that you can't argue with someone like that, because they'll just go back and forth, and they're using each one as like a shield, for excuses. So you want to make sure you don't end up being like that, okay? So train in MMA properly, okay? Now, some of the advanced moves, obviously, you're not going to need that. On the self-defense situation, in the street situation, is your opponent going to pass your guard? Probably not, probably not. So do you need counter guard passing skills? So that's the kind of thing that is going to start to separate the two. But I mean, to be able to still like hold someone in position and not get slugged, not get ground and pound, that would be a valuable training, much more than learning counter to a counter to a counter of some exotic submission, and then when you start doing the non-MMA stuff, I would try to maybe keep that separate at first from the MMA stuff, and just work on that, and then start trying to see how you could implement that in a full contact situation. Okay, that would be my recommendation. I see people, they keep it separate and it never goes into that. That's a huge mistake, because then you have no idea how to use it in full contact. And then the other mistake I see is people, they try to use the techniques in full contact right away, and this is frequent, all I see is just people dying. Like your techniques will get you killed because you're getting killed in practice, you know. So they never modified that. They never said, well, how can we stop dying in the gym so that we don't die outside the gym? That's the way you need to be thinking. So anyway, I hope this was an interesting topic. This is just something that I definitely wanted to get off my chest and share with you guys. So anyway, that's it for now. Thank you for viewing, and take care, folks.